The War Within beta is finally here, and Restoration Druid has had a huge plethora of changes already. Honestly, it's completely changed, and we're going to dive into the good, the bad and the ugly today in this beta review, both looking at Mythic Plus and raiding elements. Of course, we are in the beta, as I've previously said, and that does mean that things can change. Everything here is purely my opinion on the theory crafting I have done so far on the builds that we have available. We're going to start off by looking at the most exciting part, which is, of course, the new hero talents. They're not too crazy when it comes to Restoration Druid, and honestly, I think they're quite interesting. We have two options, Wildstalker and Keeper of the Grove. Putting it simply, there are two distinct playstyles that we can choose here. Keeper of the Grove maximizes our Treant usage, which we saw in 10.2.5 coming in, and Wildstalker mainly buffs our HOTS or heal over time spells rather than our Treants. I know that some people can find the Treant builds a little bit boring, where you're just whacking out some trees that do your healing for you, and if you are one of these people, I would say that Wildstalker would be the one to go for. Most of the abilities we're getting in both trees are actually passive, and therefore it isn't going to overcomplicate how we play as a Restoration Druid, and this is one thing I was really worried about going into the War Within with hero talents, especially for a healer such as Restoration Druid. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at Wildstalker. First up, you can see here that it's actually going to be covering both DPS and healing spells, because of course we're going to be using it with other specs as well. So the bottom paragraph is generally going to be for more restoration. And starting off with Thriving Growth here, we can see that some of our healing spells have a chance to create a symbiotic bloom on the target, healing them over 6 seconds, therefore giving us yet another hot or heal over time. Multiple instances of these can overlap. I'm thinking all the way back to Kata and Wattlek, where we had Life Bloom doing a similar thing. And this is, of course, going to help our mastery stat, where we have more hots on someone, the more healing we're going to be doing. Going down, we're just simply increasing the healing of some of our spells, increasing the healing on ourselves. And then this one here, Twin Sprouts, this is an interesting one. And I really like this kind of chaotic gameplay where there's a chain reaction. Basically, when you get a symbiotic bloom on somebody, there's a chance that you can actually have another one grow, quite similar to how Preservation Evokers work with their bloom build. I really do think the devs have taken some inspiration from Evokers there with this one. And then lastly, Vigorous Creepers at the bottom here, where people with those blooms are going to get more healing. We've also got a little bit of damage coming in here with Hunt Beneath the Open Skies, Moonfire and Sunfire being increased here, and then Root Network, where the more symbiotic blooms we have active, the more healing we're going to do overall. Going down the middle, we've got Strategic Infusion, giving us some crit chances to heal even more. We've got an option for some more utility on Entangling Vortex, or we can go for Flower Walk, where during Bark Skin, our movement speed is increased by 10%. And then we're going to get more flowers beneath our feet, healing our allies. If I actually use Bark Skin, you can see this carpet of flowers underneath my feet here being activated, healing everyone under them. And this is a really, really beautiful spell that is adding to the kind of class fantasy of Resto Druid. And it's these kind of things that I absolutely love, and hopefully you will too. So as you can see there in the Wildstalker, there really isn't much exciting happening. We're getting some symbiotic blooms. Those blooms are going to enhance our other healing spells, etc. But it's all pretty passive and isn't really changing much of our gameplay. Now going on to Keeper of the Grove, we can see it's a very different story. Starting off with Dream Surge, our Grove Guardians cause our next targeted heal to create 2 Dream Petals near the target, healing up to 3 nearby allies, and that can stack up to 3 charges. We have got Expansiveness here, increasing our mana by 5%, which I think is really interesting, as I am one of those healers that always does go a bit too far and uses up too much of their mana. Your Grove Guardians cast Moonfire on nearby targets about once every 6 seconds with Treants of the Moon. Absolutely fantastic in my opinion for Mythic Plus. And then here we have Durability of Nature, where basically your Treants are going to actually also put Cenarian Ward, which is an absorb shield, on your targets as well, further improving how good the Treants are. Early Spring reduces the cooldown of your Grove Guardians, or we can go for Bounteous Bloom, where their healing is increased. And lastly at the bottom, Harmony of the Grove, where we do more healing for the more Grove Guardians we have active. In this talent choice here, we've got a few interesting ones. Depending, I think, on if you're doing Mythic Plus, maybe it's a Fortified week versus Tyrannical. You could go for Grove's Inspiration, where your Wrath and Starfire damage is increased, Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swiftmend healing is also increased. Or Potent Enchantments, which I think is better for raiding, would be Reforestation grants Tree of Life for 2 additional seconds. And lastly, Blooming Infusion. Every 5 regrowths you cast makes your next Wrath, Starfire, or Entangling Roots instant and increases damage it deals by 100%. Again, I think really, really good for Mythic Plus. Overall, looking at the two, I think that Keeper of the Grove is going to be a lot better for Mythic Plus, whereas Wildstalker is going to be better for raiding. Imagine we're getting all of those hots and all of those symbiotic blooms up on the raid when we're ramping up for big incoming damage, and all of those blooms are then blooming onto others, etc., causing a chain reaction. Whereas we seem to have a lot more damage increasing abilities and utility over in Keeper of the Grove, which I think is going to do better in Mythic Plus. Overall then, looking at the hero talents, they're both mainly loaded with passive abilities, and they're not adding too much extra complexity to an already complex spec that we play. Moving on now over to the left for the class-specific talents, I actually really love what they've done here, and as you may know, I focus on beginner-friendly content, and I do think this is better for beginners. You may notice, if you're familiar with Druids, that the class tree has been shuffled around a bit into 3 distinct areas. If you look to the left of the tree, you can see there's a lot of feral or melee specific talents, whereas on the right-hand side of the tree, there's a lot of more boomkin style ranged DPS talents. We can see here we've got Starfire, Sunfire, we've got Moonfire talents, etc. On the left, we've got things like Rake and Rip and Skullbash. And then in the middle is more utility and a bit of healing talents. We've got things like Mass Entanglement, Natural Recovery, Wild Growth and Rejuvenation, and things like Improved Stampeding Roar. Because of this, certain talents that may have been previously essential that you must have taken might actually now be a bit out of reach. For example, we could be talking about Skullbash. Or maybe if you're in Feral, you won't be able to get over and get Typhoon, for example, in Mythic Plus. Or maybe Innovate as well would be impossible to get if you were looking to get the more feral side of things. While this may feel frustrating, I do think it's the best way to go, separating it into 3 very, very direct columns, and as I said, especially for beginner players. I think it's going to mean that we're going to really have to choose what we need again, rather than being able to have basically everything. And I think that when we have to really think about what we're choosing, that adds a lot more depth to the gameplay and meaning behind the spells that we're taking. Moving over now to the restoration side of things, the tree is massively unchanged, but there are a few key things that have changed, and I don't think people are going to be happy. Or maybe you will be. Let me know in the comments below. One of them is Adaptive Swarm. It has gone. Now, while I personally loved it, I do understand that some people may be like, thank God for that. I do feel like it was absolutely necessary to have a weak aura to actually use it properly. And even so, it was cool seeing that swarm flying around. If we are in raids and therefore we didn't really generally use it anyway, but if we were taking it in raiding, for example, you don't want to be using it on a boss. In Mythic Plus, maybe on Tyrannical, it could be the same situation, although it was good if it was a fortified week. So it really does kind of depend how you look at Adaptive Swarm and if you're happy about it going or not. One specific talent I forgot to mention actually was on the class tree, which is Fluid Form. You may notice that Boomkin form is gone, so Fluid Form means that Shred and Rake can be used in any form and shift you into cat form. Mangle can be used in any form and shifts you into bear form, and Wrath and Starfire shifts you into Moonkin form if known. This actually means that your shapeshifting is a lot more fluid and you can just do it all in one button, which is going to massively simplify weaving damage into your healing in Mythic Plus. This pairs really nicely with certain new talents, like this one here, Dream of Cenarius. While Heart of the Wild is active, Wrath and Shred transfer 150% of their damage, and Starfire and Swipe transfer 100% of their damage into healing on a nearby ally, meaning that us Druids who do like to incorporate DPS into our healing in Mythic Plus can have an even easier time doing it, meaning some of that damage is actually going to be turned into healing. We also, above that, have Call of the Elder Druid. My apologies, I've gone the other way around, but I didn't. When you shift into combat, shapeshift form, or cast Star Surge, you gain Heart of the Wild for 10 seconds, and that can happen once every 1 minute. Abilities not associated with your specialization are substantially empowered by 45 seconds. Balance, cast time of balance spells reduced by 30% and damage is increased. In Feral, you're going to gain combo points and physical damage is increased. And Guardian, Bear form gives us an additional 20% stamina. And remember, whenever we go into our form, we can get that happen every minute. Meaning, once a minute, you can shapeshift into cat form and you will actually get Heart of the Wild, therefore meaning you can do even more DPS and then more healing from the Dream of Cenarius talent when you are doing DPS in Mythic Plus. If you are a pure healer, you may not be a very big fan of that, however. Overall, I do like the talent changes. I think it's making it even easier, especially in Mythic Plus, to do more damage and do some cat weaving when needed. And it's not fundamentally changing the restoration tree. However, we are going to really have to think more carefully about which talents we are picking, especially on the class side of things. There are certain ones which may or may not miss out on, like Sunfire, now requiring 3 points just to get down to it. There's the choice of Flourish and Photosynthesis now being on the same node, meaning again, we're going to have to make a really big choice on which one we want there. And over here, we also have Prosperity. This has now returned, giving our Swiftmend 2 charges, which can be a bit awkward sometimes, considering that we do need to absorb a hot to actually use our Swiftmend, meaning we'd have to use up 2 rather than 1. Of course, getting into the Tree of Life then would be a lot quicker, so I'm not sure how that's going to weigh out, but we will see. Overall, in the dungeons I have tried with Restoration Druid in the beta so far, it's been a really, really fun time, and I think personally I'm going to be going more towards the Symbiotic Bloom build over Treants, but we'll see what comes out top by the end. I think we've got a still really strong core of utility, even though the class tree talents have moved around a bit, and the overall gameplay hasn't changed too much, so that it doesn't feel too different from what we were playing before. Thank you for watching. I really want to hear your comments down below. And if you are looking for class guides when the War Within comes out, of course, I have got you covered. If you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. And I will be putting up a full, more detailed analysis on Restoration Druid on my Patreon. That is the main way you can support this channel and get the more content that you do enjoy. And I do also have lots of Patreon-only content like written guides, behind-the-scenes info, spreadsheets, and my LVUI profiles. We also offer coaching to our VIP Patreons now, and in some videos you're going to get your name at the end of the video, along with priority support in the Discord, because for any class questions, we do help you in the Discord as well. And if you're looking for any other analysis, I am testing out other specs as well, so make sure to subscribe and check out my channel for more of those.